Welcome guys, this is going to be module number 1, Intro to Python Bootcamp course. Today I'm going to be teaching you guys the fundamentals of Python, how to open up a Jupyter notebook, navigating around the Jupyter notebook, and a couple different other things before we get into the learning portion of this course. This will be the intro video, so we'll learn a little bit about Python, its history, and get into some of the topics that I listed earlier. So let's jump into the presentation and let's get to it. Okay guys, so welcome to the Python Bootcamp. This is going to be Intro to Python, Intro to Programming module number 1. We're going to be getting into some basics today of Python and walking you guys through some of the basics that you should know before we get into some complex topics in this course. All right, so introduction, Intro to Programming. If you've never written any code today, will be your first time writing some code, so get excited. Let's jump into it. We're going to be covering the topics that I listed at the beginning of this video, but to overview quickly, we're going to be going over the history of Python, the Jupyter notebook, and how we're going to utilize it to write our code. We're also going to be going over some basics in Python, and we'll get into variables today, and then we'll close that out for today. So who am I? My name is Matthew. I am going to be your instructor for this course. This video will be about 20 to 25 minutes, so hang on for the ride and let's get into it. Before we start, let's take a poll. I want you guys to take this quick poll so I know where everyone's at in this boot camp. And as always, if you need any help during this entire boot camp, feel free to reach out to me at my email that's listed in the description. And I'll say it now, it's Matthew, NGUYE 2023 at FAU.edu. Alrighty, so this course is going to be good if you're a novice to intermediate. If you're advanced or expert, do you want to help me teach it next semester? All jokes aside, let's get started and let's jump into the workbook. So I included a meme here about Python. The best way to learn a language is to speak to the native. So it's a guy talking to a snake. As you'll see in the next slide, Python is actually not based on the snake, the animal. It's actually based on something else. So who am I? My name is Matthew Wynn. Again, I'm your graduate instructor for this course. I'm going to be teaching you guys all about programming in Python and specifically getting you ready for your later courses at Florida Atlantic University. I work in financial services for 5+ years as a financial analyst, as a data analyst, and also as a business analyst. I've had a lot of different roles in my career, but I've worked really hard at learning the fundamentals of finance, accounting, data analysis, data analytics, and everything that falls in between there. I studied accounting at the University of Florida for my undergrad. I'm currently pursuing my master's at Florida Atlantic University. I'm a TA at Florida Atlantic University for the Graduate Executive Education Program, and I was a TA at University of Florida for 3.5 years. I taught an Intro to Excel class where we did a little bit of SQL in that course as well. I'm hoping to pursue my CPA, finishing it up in the next year or so, and doing my master's, and one day hopefully going to be doing my PhD. I love Python. I use it pretty much every day. I do a lot of different things with Python, from building financial models to web scraping, and it's a great tool that I have in my tool belt now after some years of rough times. And I'll explain that quickly on a tangent. When I was first learning how to program, actually, my first language I learned was JavaScript. I learned it from a mentor of mine, as you might have known in the intro video. And I switched over to Python just because it's more friendly in the finance world, and there's a lot of cool libraries you can use to do some statistical analysis with, and also do a lot of data analysis within Python. It's a very powerful language. It's one of the most widely used language on the web, if not the most widely used language. And let me backtrack, not on the web, but it's by the people. JavaScript is the web language that's mostly used. Anyways, that's a picture of me and my girlfriend. We were at my first marathon. She's amazing, and hopefully we'll soon to be fiance one day. Alrighty, so let's get into the creation of Python. He was created by a man named Guido van Rossum. He is a Dutch fellow, and in Python, as you guys know, is a widely used language, but the actual making of Python is actually interesting. He started working on Python in the late 1980s, and it officially came into existence in 1991. He was looking to create a language that was easy to read and write and understand, and something that allowed people to use the language in simplicity and clarity, because a lot of the other languages that were around at that time were very hard to get into, and the barrier of entry of those languages were quite tough, and they're even quite tough to this day. C++ is being one of them. And jumping into the next bullet point is that the programming language that inspired Python, C++ and C were one of them. It was also inspired by ABC, Modula 3, and Smalltalk. I don't really know any of those other languages. I do know C and C++, not amazing at them, but I've used them in the past. The name origin, like I said, doesn't have anything to do with the snake. It actually has to do with Monty Python's Flying Circus. It was a comedy show, so that's interesting. And you can see Guido Van Rossum over here with the Python snake, so that's pretty interesting. Python enhancement proposals was a change in the Python scene in the year 2000. It allowed other developers to collaborate on Python and allowed it to grow its base and kind of get more on a collaborative approach. Python switched to 2.0 to 3.0 in 2008. That allowed some big updates to happen, and it allowed the language to actually improve the design of the language and allowed it to kind of make its next step from being this language that was created maybe 20 years ago at the time or 15 years ago at the time to a world-renowned language that pretty much a lot of programmers, if not, I would say a large portion of programmers we use to this day. Guido's retirement was in 2018. He stepped down from Python at the time and allowed it to be an open source community. And as you see, the Python is the most popular programming language in the world. Go back. All right, so today's agenda, we're going to install Python and Anaconda in Jupyter Notebook. I'm actually going to attach a separate video for this here, so make sure to check out that video. It's pretty easy. All you have to do is go to the Python website and download the Python installer for whatever system you decide to use. I'm using Windows. And then you can download Anaconda, which is going to be where Jupyter Notebook will live. You can also use the Jupyter Notebook in the browser, but again, I'll attach another video that'll go into depth and kind of take you from step to step. We're going to overview the Jupyter Notebook today and overview, the fundamentals of it and how to use it and store files and whatnot. We're going to do an overview of Python, overview of the syntax and semantics of Python. So let's get into it. Python, what can you do inside of Python? Well, you pretty much do anything. You can go as simple as making a calculator, step it up to maybe a to-do list. You can build financial models in Python. You can build machine learning models in Python, which everyone knows about artificial intelligence and machine learning, so that's awesome. You can make web scraping tools from Python, so picking up data from different web sources. And you can make even some simple web servers in Python. And these are some of the apps that you can look to build in Python that might help you visualize a little bit better. Okay, hands-on, so I'm going to be using Windows. We'll be working in Jupyter Notebook as our IDE. Feel free to use any other IDE you feel is best fit for you. I suggest Jupyter Notebook or Jupyter Notebook in the browser. If you don't want to install locally to your computer, it's completely up to you. If you have any questions during the hands-on tutorial, please email me at matthewNguye2023@fau.edu, and let's get into it. So let's take a look at the Jupyter Notebook. These are some of the bullet points that I had highlighted for the Jupyter Notebook. It has interactive computing, cell-based structure, so if you ever use something like Excel before, you might be able to have some parallels there. It allows you to execute your code in the notebook. It has markdown support, which allows you to actually be able to put headers and different sections in your code that's really helpful and useful if you want to organize what the code you're writing. The kernel allows you to run all the cells or run the cells, restart the cells. It allows you to start the notebook from scratch and maybe get through some errors and debug through that. So in the kernel, you can interrupt your cells, you can restart your cells, you can also shut down your notebook, do a lot of different things there. You can share notebooks inside of Jupyter Notebook. You can do error handling and debugging. And then there are some keyboard shortcuts that I'll attach a PDF document with them so you can take a look at it. All right, everybody, let's jump into the Jupyter Notebook and let's get into it. So if you look at your desktop here, if you open Anaconda Navigator, you'll have this window come up, but you can easily just go down to whatever search bar you want to go to. I'm going to close it out just so I can show you. So you're going to go to Anaconda Navigator. Now you can open this up here. You can also open up the Anaconda PowerShell prompt. So let's just open this up real quick. Looks super confusing, but let's just do something like Python -V. It'll tell you what Python version you're running. If we want to do something like pip list, it'll show you all the Python libraries that are built into your Jupyter Notebook through the Anaconda PowerShell. So that's that. We'll do some other stuff in here later in the course, but I'm going to close this out so I don't confuse anybody. Let's get into the Anaconda Navigator. So I'm going to click on Anaconda Navigator. It's going to pull up. All right, so you should have something like this. You can create an account in Anaconda Navigator. I did. Not sure if you have to, but I would. And what we're going to want to do is we're always going to want to navigate to this Jupyter Notebooks down here, this middle one right here, and click Launch. It's going to launch the Jupyter Notebook in your browser. Pull this over. So this is what your Jupyter Notebook will look like. These are some of your folders that you have on your desktop. I made a folder called Jupyter Notebook Files. Now, just to take you through a little bit of the Jupyter Notebook here, okay? So in this tab, you're gonna have all your files. You can quit or log out here. You can upload files here from your computer. You can also create new files like a Python notebook. This is what we're gonna be using in this course. You can create text files, you can create folders. You can also access the terminal here. So as we did before, we can just type in again, Python V to see what Python version we have. Okay, cool. So I'll get out of here, go back. You can check the running tab to see the terminals that are running currently. So you can check out the terminals that are running. I got one running here. You can check out the notebooks that are running currently. No notebooks are currently running. You can also check out clusters here. I'll go back to files. Let's actually look at how to make a folder. So you can go to new folder. It'll come down here as untitled folder. Click on this check mark. You can rename it. So we'll call this Python course. Click enter. And then what you want to do in there, you'll want to actually go into the folder, and then you can make your notebooks in here by going to new Python, and your notebook will pop up. So this is what we're looking at. I'm going to switch back over to my folder now. So now that you've made yours, let me switch back over to mine. So we'll go to intro to Python. That will have our PYNB file, which is our Python file. Now let's take a look at the Jupyter Notebook here. What we have at the top is we have the file tab, which we can create new notebooks in. We can also open notebooks. We can make a copy of a notebook. We can save a notebook as. We can rename the notebook. We can also save checkpoints. We can revert checkpoint, which basically means versions of our code here. We're able to do a print preview of our notebook if we'd like, which will just basically print out our notebook. We can go to download the notebook as an HTML document. We can download it as a markdown, download it as a Python file, or download it as a PY file, which is also a Python file, and all that type of stuff. We can trust the notebook here. That'll basically allow us to trust any libraries or any installations we make if Anaconda Navigator doesn't trust it. So I would just not do anything with this here unless you need to. And then we can close and halt the notebook. In the edit tab, you can do some things with the cells, and these are cells here. And as you see, there's an error going on here, but I'm going to show you guys why I had the error there. We can split cells, we can merge cells, we can move them up and down, we can look at the notebook's metadata, we can do find and replace. That will find certain text strings and replace them. So we can do that. If you guys have ever used a program like Excel or something like that, there's some of those things there. We can copy and cut cell attachments. We can insert images. So the view, we can toggle the header, so you can see the header here. We could also toggle the toolbar, so you can see the toolbar. I'm going to pull that back up. We can toggle the line numbers, so you can see the lines of code. I'm going to actually turn that on, and then you can mess around with this stuff. You can look at the cell toolbar as well. Next is going to be the insert tab. This is, you can insert cells above or below, and basically cells are just areas that you're going to run your code in. I like to use the shortcut A and B. If I click on this cell over here, I can click A, I'll insert one above. Now if I click on this cell again and I click B, I'll insert a cell below. And I'm going to delete those by clicking DD. Click on the cell DD. Now we can actually run the cells in our notebook here. We can run selected cells. We can run all cells. We can run the cells selected below or above. We can change the cell type to a code cell block that will run code. We can change it to a markdown or a raw NB convert. We'll focus on the code and the markdown in this course, which basically just converts the Jupyter Notebook into some other type of files. Don't really worry about that now. We can toggle the outputs. We can toggle all the outputs. In the kernel tab, we can interrupt the kernel, restart the kernel. We can restart and run the entire kernel. We can shut the kernel down. So let's shut down the kernel. Basically, shutting down the kernel just shuts down the whole notebook. And in order to do it again, you have to restart the kernel here. You can look at some widgets in here. You can embed widgets. We won't get into many widgets right now, but we might get into some later in the course. Basically, just things that you can do data visualizations for. You can have interactive dashboards by using widgets and whatnot. And then you can also go to the help tab, which will have a user interface tour, which will basically take you through the Jupyter Notebook in this case. So I'm going to exit out of that. So I wanted to show you guys this really quickly because I wanted to show you something about the Jupyter Notebook that's pretty cool and that might help you, and that's debugging your code. So if I run this block of code here, it's going to give me this error. So whenever you run code, you're going to run into errors at some point. And just to let you guys know, the name error will appear below, and that's how you know what's going on with your code and how you can fix it. So let me delete this block out, and let's hop back into the PowerPoint presentation. Alrighty, so in this course, we're going to be going over the programming basics. Today, I'm just going to be doing a high-level outline of what we're going to be learning in this course related to programming itself and Python. We're going to be going over variables today on a basic level. Variables are basically areas you can store data in. They allow you to manipulate the data that you store inside of a variable, which is basically a container for data or information, and you can use that to your advantage in various functions. You can store variables in data structures as well, and it's just an area where you can store information. Next, we're going to get into data types. Data types are going to be the type of data that you actually have inside of Python. So the different data types that we have inside of Python are as follows. We have strings, we have integers, which consist of floats and complex data type. We have sequence types, which are lists, tuples, and ranges. We have mapping types, which are dictionaries. We have set types, which are sets and frozen sets. We have booleans, which is true and false. We have binary types, such as bytes, byte array, and memory view. And we have a none type as well. Basically, these data types are used to specify what your specific code you're writing is. So if you're writing out a word, that would be a string. If you're writing out a number, that would be an integer, and so forth. We have data storage options, which are also considered data types, which are lists, tuples, ranges, dictionaries, and sets. There are also objects and classes inside of Python, which we'll get into the last module, but just think of the ones I listed before. We're going to go over these in detail in the next coming modules, so just giving you a high-level overview here. Next, we have conditionals, which is going to be true and false, also considered booleans. Essentially, what that means is that we can write specific conditional statements to get us a true or false value. Inside of these conditionals, we use things like else and else if. And we also have something called the bool function that allows us to evaluate any value that gives you a true or false value. But let's stick to the if statements for this course. And then we're going to get into loops. So there are things like the for loop. There's things like the while loop that allow you to loop through data, which essentially means just allow a block of code to run over a certain period of time or under a certain condition. Next, we have functions. And essentially what functions are is it's a block of code that allows you to run when you call it. A function can also be passed data. That's known as a parameter. And a function will return specific data or an output as a result. And that is used by defining the word def in front of the function name. All right, now that we've gone over all the basics of Python, going over everything we're going to be learning pretty much in this course, or the core part of this course, I included a little meme here. It says, "My code doesn't work. I have no idea why. My code works. I have no idea why." And that's just the nature of programming. And to let you guys know the true and honesty of this journey, you're going to go through a lot of this stuff, so just be ready. But trust me, it's going to be worth it. All right, so inputs, outputs, and comments. So I included another meme here. It looks like it popped up later in the presentation, but that's okay. So Python developers, the print statement, and they said this is a debug method, because in other programming languages, there are more formal ways to debug. There are also formal ways to debug in Python, but we might not get to that in this course. But the print statement is a great way to debug. And also they have that error debug. They also have that line that I showed you guys in the Jupyter Notebook that allows us to do some debugging as well. So the print statement is going to print an output of information. We have the input statement. Okay, so the input statement will allow a user to put in data. The print statement is going to output the code that comes from an input. So we can use a print statement to see what our code is doing. It's a very useful tool. And comments, in addition to this, comments allow us to signify some words or a sentence to let us know what our code is actually doing. Very useful and very helpful. So let's actually jump into the workbook and look at some of these concepts and kind of get through some of this. All right, guys, let's hop back into the workbook and let's take a look at what we're dealing with here. All right, so this is our Python Jupyter notebook, guys. So if you guys take a look here, we have a header here, and inside of Python, Jupyter notebooks, inside of Jupyter notebooks, you can actually write headers instead of code. So you can go up to cell, and you can go to cell type and do markdown, or you can. So in Python Jupyter Notebooks, there's two basic types of cells that we're going to be working with for the most part, and that's going to be the markdown cell, and it's also going to be the code block cell. So again, if you want to add a block, just click A and you add a block above, or B and add a block below, and you can actually change the cell type here to markdown so that when you type in things like, hello, my name is Matthew, this is just going to be free text, and you can actually make it a header by doing a hashtag here. You could also make it a header by doing a hashtag, hello, my name is Matthew. And that way you know that this is a header. If you want to do 2 hashtags, it'll be a header 2, 3 hashtags, a header 3, 4 headers, a hashtag 4, which will make them smaller. And you can do those kind of things in there too. I'm going to delete these out by clicking D on the cell. DD. All right, so now that you got the basics of what Markdown is, just a way to separate out your notebook and add some headers based on. So now that we got the basics of Markdown, and I'll include a couple different things you can do as well inside of Markdown, like making things italic or bold or making lists and whatnot. Let's get into the actual code itself. And now we are going over inputs and outputs and comments. So as you guys can see, if you just write hashtag up here, and write, this is a comment, you know that this is not going to be part of your code. It's just a way for you to comment out what you're doing. You can also put them next to your code, for example, here, such as this is an input. It just signifies what your code is doing, and I highly recommend you put these with your code so you can explain to the user or yourself what you did in the code. Okay, so we talked about inputs and outputs. So let's talk about the actual running of an input and output. So in here, we're going to get into what a variable is in the next slide, but just know that this is a variable called name. We're having the input function here that basically says we're going to be having an input menu pop up, and what's going to be the text before the input menu is going to say, what's your name? So let's write this again. Let's write name equals input, parentheses, and in here, let's write in quotation marks for a string, what is your name? Question mark. Now, the next line of code is going to print out whatever we put in the name input. Now, I'm going to take this out. So basically, again, the print statement is an output function. So we can write print. Inside here, we can write the name of the variable, and we'll do an addition. Now, that's not adding like numerically, but it's just adding another block. And then we'll write in quotation marks, is my name. Happy face. All right, now let's run this cell. Oops. Let's run this cell. So it's going to ask, what is your name? My name is Matthew Wynn. Click enter, and it'll say my name is Matthew. Matthew Wynn is my name. So that's a way you can get the output of your code by putting in a print statement there, and the input statement will allow a user or yourself to put in an input. Now, let's hop back into the workbook and let's take a look at some variables. All right, so what are variables, guys? Let's take a look at variables and what they do for us inside of Python. So the first thing, variable is an area to store data, as I said before, so you can name them whatever you would like. There are some restrictions on naming conventions. I highly recommend you use. So variables are areas where you can store information in data. As I said before, you can store numbers, texts, you can store data sets, and a lot of other things inside of variables. Variable names in Python must start with the letter A through Z capitalized, or an underscore. There are certain keywords that you cannot have inside of Python as variable names. For example, these might be function names or methods or certain restricted names you can't name inside of Python, and you'll go and learn these on your own. There are a lot of different ones you can't have, but we'll kind of stick with the basics here and name our variables in a way that is descriptive of what our variable is actually representing. So if you want to have a name variable, maybe name would be a good variable, or if it's first name, maybe you'll have first underscore name. Make sure that there's no spaces in your variable. If you want to have a space, use an underscore as you see here. The rest of the variable name can contain letters, digits, and underscores as well. And that's that. Variable names are case sensitive, so name and then name with a capital N are considered different variables. Just keep that in mind. Now let's jump back into the workbook because that's where we're going to get the most use out of this. Let's add heading here by clicking M on this cell to make it a markdown cell. Let's name this hashtag variable. Let's run this cell so we can get this as a header. Cool. So in Python, let's say we want to make a variable. So let's say name equals, in a string, Matthew win. Now if we do print name, instead of doing print Matthew win, we'll see that we're going to get Matthew win. So let's run this cell. So the name is Matthew win. Now let's say we come down here and we say name is now equal to 1. Let's print name again. We're going to get 1. So as you go down in your code blocks, as you reassign variable names, as you reassign variables to the same names, the variable will change. So let's say we have now the name will be name plus Vera, which is my other last name. So let's run this again. Matthew win Vera. I'm going to add a space here. Matthew win Vera. Perfect. That's great. So if I want to make sure that the people that are reading my code see that this can't change, I'm going to change this to name. I'm also going to change this to name. And I'm going to change this to name. Change this to name. Let's run this. So that now, if we're reading this code, we know that this variable is a constant, or we want it to be a constant. We can put this is a constant and should not change. Treated as a constant, should not change. So that's the variables with strings. Now let's do something else. So let's say we have x equals 3, y equals 3, x equals 10, y equals x. What is the output for this variable? What is the output for this function? X, y. Take a second and try it yourself. Okay, so if we read the Python code, we see that x is equal to 3. Now we're saying y is equal to 3. Now we're saying x is equal to 10, right? So now x has changed since we restated the variable in this case. Now we're attributing a different value to x, and now we're saying y is equal to x, right? And we're going to print x and y. Now if you said 3 and 3, or 3 and 10, or if you said 10 and 3, or 10 and 10, the only one that's correct in that case is 10 and 10, because x is in the lowest part of the code is now equal to 10, and now y is equal to x. So if we run this cell, we're going to get 10, 10. So as you guys can see, variables might be a little bit tricky to grasp at first, but just know in order to keep track of whatever your variable is, utilize the different numbers on your code so you can notice where the variables are changing. And if you need to make a variable a constant, like I said before, and you want to make sure it doesn't change, you can use a naming convention with uppercase letters to indicate that you do not want this variable to change. And that is that. So let's write our first lines of code. Let's finish off this session with writing a little bit of code and using some of the things that we learned. Don't be intimidated to write code. It's not rocket science, though you can get to rocket science by writing some code. It's easy and it'll only get easier. Let's go get it done. All right, so now we're back in our workbook. Let's say we're asked to make a simple interface that allows us to enter someone's age, their name, and their address, and we want to output their name, age, and address. So let's do it. We're going to make this a markdown cell, so we'll click on the cell and click M, click hashtag my profile, Let's run this cell. All right, so let's set some variables. Name equal to input. What is your, oops, we'll put this in a string. What is your name? Let's copy this. Let's put this. Let's make this age. What is your age? Let's put address as a variable, and we'll copy this and put what is your address. And what we'll do is we'll write a print statement or an output, and we'll say name, age, name, plus, we'll put a space in quotes, age, plus, put some quotes, plus address. Okay, awesome. Now let's run this. What is my name? My name is Matthew. Enter. What is my age? My age is 24. What is my address? My address is 1542. I'm not going to put my real address, but Folker Town Lane. Enter. Matthew Wynn, 24, 1542, Folker Town Lane. Now let's say we want to put some commas in between this. So we'll just put a comma instead of the space. Comma, space. Space. Go back one. Let's run it again. Matthew, 24, 1542, Folker Town Lane. Simple enough. We are outputting our name, our age, and the address. So as you guys can see, Python is simple enough in the sense that it's very easy to get started, and it allows us to utilize many different things. In this lecture, we went over the intro to programming and what we're going to be going over in this course and the overview of each of those components. We went over what a Jupyter Notebook is and how to write Python in Jupyter Notebook. And lastly, we got into the basics of writing our first lines of code, and I'm excited to keep learning and growing with you guys and show you guys how to do this. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you have any questions on the exercises or any topics in the video, please feel free to shoot me an email at matthewNguye@fau.edu. And no N after the E. It was not a mistake. That's just how my user ID is. So feel free to shoot me an email there. And if you guys have any more questions, feel free to shoot me a message. Thank you and have a great day. I'll see you.